admired by art experts, popular with the public, and widely exhibited in the world's top museums. Impressionism dominated the art world for nearly 150 years. Renowned for its painters' pioneering approach to art, the groundbreaking genre has facilitated the emergence and shaped the evolution of several art movements, setting its role as a catalyst of modern art. Impressionism is a movement of art that emerged in 1870s France. Rejecting the rigid rules of fine arts, artists showcased a new way to observe and depict the world in their work, foregoing realistic portrayals for fleeting impressions of their surroundings, which often were found outside. Impressionism became a major movement, first in painting and later in music. The most conspicuous characteristic of Impressionism in painting was an attempt to accurately and objectively record visual reality in terms of transient effects of light and color. Impressionism was developed by Claude Monet and other Paris-based artists from the early 1860s. Though the process of painting on the spot can be said to have been pioneered in Britain by John Constable in around 1813 to 17 through his desire to paint nature in a realistic way. Instead of painting in a studio, Impressionists found that they could capture the momentary and transient effects of sunlight by working quickly in front of their subjects in the open air rather than in a studio. This resulted in a greater awareness of light and color and the shifting pattern of the natural scene. Brushwork became rapid and broken into separate dabs in order to render the fleeting quality of light. This new approach in painting diverged from the traditional techniques, culminating in a movement that changed the course of art history. The first group exhibition was in Paris in 1874. The work shown was greeted with mockery when Monet's Impression Sunrise piece was singled out for ridicule. These are the other core artists of Impressionism who were also often associated with the movement. From the time of its conception, Impressionism had been defined by a set of characteristics. These include painterly brushwork, distinctive colors, depictions of common subject matter, a focus on light, and composition inspired by photography. First, we have thick brushstrokes. Painterly brushwork is perhaps Impressionism's most recognizable trait. Unlike the carefully blended brushstrokes distinctive of previous movements, Impressionist artists employed thick, sketch-like strokes. These quick marks captured the ephemeral fleeting nature of moments and allowed artists to experiment with color and the ways in which different tones interact on the canvas. Next is distinctive color palette. In addition to brushwork, Impressionists also exhibited a unique approach to color. Rather than mix paint to achieve certain tones, they instead grouped together individual brushstrokes of various colors. This method is particularly apparent in Impressionist depiction of shadows and snow, which respectively are never simply black and white. Impressionist painting also often feature neutral color schemes with vivid pops of red that both draw in the eye and add balance to compositions. Next is focus on light. Many artists, most notably Claude Monet, had a penchant for painting outside. With this approach, artists were able to closely study the light and its effects on landscapes, buildings, and other outdoor sites. Let's proceed with everyday subjects. Another avant-garde aspect of Impressionism is the everyday nature of its subjects. Typical content portrayed in Impressionist paintings include still life depictions, landscapes, portraits of friends and family, and modern city scenes, a far cry from the historical, mythological, and allegorical scenes found in traditional French paintings. And lastly, we have creative cropping. Inspired by photography, a new and pioneering practice at the time, Impressionists produced paintings that acted as authentic snapshots of specific moments in time. With this muse in mind, artists began framing their scenes in more natural ways, resulting in asymmetrical compositions cropped like a candid photographs. However, these snapshots often actually required ample planning and premeditation.
Good morning. teacher, and classmates. In continuation on the topic of Impressionism, I will be discussing its components, its subject of choice, its techniques, and its other forms of artwork. When Impressionist paintings are presented in museums today and sold for millions at auction, we don't question their legitimacy or are they worthy of esteem and attention. But when they were first exhibited in Paris in 1874, they were considered as unfinished, slapdash, lowbrow, and renegade. With the way art history has evolved, or in the view of some, devolved, how do we understand this picture whose original ability lay in their power to shock, especially sa atong mga mata karon nga dili na kasalaingon nga interesting or unradical. As may nabilin sila, why should we look at them? And what do we see? First, its subject. Impressionist painter did not paint in their imaginations, whereas they nagpaint from literature or from history or from mythology like most of their predecessors did. Instead, they painted what they saw, the world around them, the towns where they live. As nagapuyo, mga bukid silang palibot, mga tao nga nag-farm or nang-laba, even the holiday nga ilang gina-celebrate, their family, their friends, their studio, the things around their home. Sometimes they were commissioned to portray someone and paint them. Impressionist painter liked to paint ordinary things that were part of everyday life. They painted women, nagapanglaba, kapamlansya. They painted ballet dancers who were exercising, horses getting ready for race. But nobody before the Impressionists thought that this subject were interesting enough to paint. Para sila, boring daw to. But for the Impressionists, it's something interesting. This new style didn't arrive out of clear blue sky, but the painting were often created under one. So, ang isa sa pinaka-distinguishing characteristics of the Impressionist art is that they were created outside of the studio. Compared sa uban na painter before, they paint in a slow, studio-based approach na common ato nga time in the annual salons of French Royal Academy, whereby tonal graduation were gradually built upon layer of glazes. Impressionist works were different. They paint entirely outdoors. O ang Impressionist gamay ra ilang canvas na ginagamit para madali mahuman compared magud sa uban dadko dugay, and they want to capture the moment magud and the color of the atmosphere. Can sometimes dali ra ba kaya mag-change ang weather, so kinahanglan dali po sila mahuman sa ilang painting. So that's the way they produce their art. The technique. So in general, we could say that this group, the Impressionist painting, were mostly painted in modern life, in cityscapes, in landscapes, using brighter palette of colors, a broken brushstroke, and loosely defined forms that gave the work an air of spontaneity. Yeah, that's the word. So much so that the critic Louie Layog commented on the accuracy of the title of one of Claude Monet's painting on display, Impressionist Sunrise. To Layog, it was merely an impression, a sloppy and unfinished sketch, unsuitable for display or sale. He dubbed the show Exhibition of the Impressionists as an insult. But another critic who gave a positive comment on the Impressionists say that it's lively, brisk, light, captivating, what a rapid grasp of the object, and what an amusing facture. Its summary, agreed, but how spot on the marks are. So what are the techniques used by the Impressionists that cause some to look at it with contempt, and why some look at it with appreciation and beauty? So ang mga technique na ginagamit sa mga Impressionists is dili ka siya ingon nga bago jud, but it is the Impressionists ang nagamit sila in combination. So among the techniques na ginagamit sa mga Impressionists kay number 1, short, thick strokes of paint quickly capture the essence of the subject rather than its details. The paint gina-apply nila is impasto, meaning baga nga pag-apply sa paint to add texture to the painting. Kaduha, colors are applied side by side with a little mixing as possible. So wala na nila gina-mix compared sa uban nga artist nga mag-mix lag painting sa palette. Dito nila i-mix daan ang color before nila i-apply sa canvas. But the Impressionists directly applied color and put it side by side. So they exploit the principle of simultaneous contrast. So nice kay tanawon kay nice siya tanawon. Katulo, gray and dark tones are produced by mixing complementary colors. So dili sila nagagamit og dark or black na color, but they instead use color nga mag-create og dark tone by using complementary colors. Kaupat, they use wet paint in place into wet paint without waiting for a successive application to dry. So wala nila gahulat nga mauga pa ang katong layer nga ilang gi-apply. Kung basa pa na siya, then they apply more. So nga naman, it create softer edges. Kalima, the Impressionist painting uses surface that is typically opaque. Basta gamit og transparent nga surface or translucent, but they use opaque. Kaunom, the paint is applied to a white or light colored ground. So compared sa past lang nga mga artists, gigamit sila og dark gray or strongly colored nga mga material, the Impressionists use white canvases. Kapito, the Impressionist play of natural light is emphasized. So kung magpaint sila, gusto nila ipakita ang the way how light reflects mga objects. Kaya gusto man sa Impressionist makapture nila ang atmospheric effect bitaw sa ilang subject. Sometimes wala sila time kaya lahi na ang color sa langit. Sometimes ang paint ilang inabot niya og improvisation bitaw. Sila na lang mag-add sa gusto itong akuan. But sometimes po mato sila pagkaugma same hour para makita po doon na the same nga color to get it just right. So those are the 7 techniques used by the Impressionists to give an art of Impressionism. We'll now look at the content and compositions of the Impressionist artwork. The Impressionists, ganan ka sila og light. Again and again, hindi na try nila og capture ang ilang ephemeral effect sa light. They like to show broken clouds filtering through trees, and especially as it reflects on water. An early review asserted that these artists were painting things not just as they are, but just as they appear to be. Meaning, wala na lagi na portray yun exactly kung unsa ang object nila lagi na paint. Like sa tree, wala na lagi na paint nga na trunk ang tree, na ay branch, na ay dahon. Bila lang ginabuhat is mag-apply na sila og brown plus green, then muna na apply sa subject, mag-create na siya og illusion nga mura siya kahoy. This new art form also involves a lot of women on its painting, but they represented in a new way. Berthe Morisot, a famous Impressionist, give us a remarkable view into the domestic sphere and lives of well-to women. Women of a variety of classes were a great subject for the Impressionists. Dili itong mga nude na nakahigda sa bed, but they are shown kung unsa gid ilang ginabuhat yun. Like, nasa balay, kapang tubig sa tanom, kung kaunsa sila. And they also paint the Paris nightlife, and also being it. The creation of Impressionist art has many influence. Among them is the Japanese art ukiyo-e art prints or Japonism. Ang kasikatan sa Japanese art causes the Impressionists to use more flattening of form and the use of open space. So muna siya ang mga influence sa Japanese art. Another influence is the arrival of photography. How? So nag-cause ang photography to free ang mga painter from the shackles of realism. So the painter do what they do best, which being colorful. Mas tactile sila noon, and they become more painty. Impressionism are not only bounded in the field of painting. There are other forms of Impressionism. Among this is in photography. Pictorial photographer whose work is characterized by soft-focus atmospheric effects have also been called Impressionists. In sculpture, a guy named Auguste Rodin is sometimes called an Impressionist for the way he used roughly modeled surfaces to suggest transient light effects. So sa film po, napoy Impressionist. French Impressionist cinema is a term applied to a loosely defined group of film and filmmakers in France in 1919 to 1929. In music and literature, there are also Impressionist influence. Musical Impressionism ang tawag sa movement in European classic music na nag-arose in 19th century, continued in the middle of 20th century. Impressionism has also been used to describe works in literature. Ang characteristic sa Impressionism sa literature kay maminis la og gamay nga detail to convey the sensory impressions of the incident or ang scene. So, makapture niya for the few words lang ang impression sa scene. Karon, Impressionist painters are encouraged to find their own singular vision to portray their own niche in the market. And that singular, subjective vision has what Impressionist has come to embody. Mogi na siya ang naka-unique sa Impressionist painting. Ilang subjective perception of reality. That's why ilang mga last name karon still hold power and evoke strong association, sells for millions at auction, and draws crowd. So makakita kag Impressionist nga painting, pakita yun nimo na tao behind that canvas nga nagpaint mark by mark according to his own distinct perception and manner of style. Impressionism was one of the first string of avant-garde art movement, each rejecting the tradition and embracing mga bag-o or promoting new ideas. What art could be and what art could do. It's an optical delight, giving us a fascinating window of a historical moment created by supremely talented artists who push art into a new direction to better represent that moment and their own view of it. And that is enough. So in closing, we've discussed the subject, the composition, the technique being used, and other forms of Impressionist artwork. So thank you for listening. That is Impressionism. Goodbye.